This is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show at 910 KINA Salina, bringing you innovative talk radio that surprises, entertains, and sometimes informs you. Today, I feel very privileged to have Father Randall Weber, Vicar General of the Catholic Diocese of Salina, here with us this morning. Father Weber is an exorcist, and he's here to talk to us about the very serious subject of the Catholic rite of exorcism. Welcome, Father Weber.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Well, and this is such an intriguing topic for so many people. Let me just first ask you a general question as what is the Catholic definition of exorcism?
Exorcism is the expelling of evil spirits, unclean spirits from persons who are possessed by them.
Now, is the person that is possessed by them generally thought themselves to be of a good spirit to begin with, but it's just this evil spirit or possession taking them over and causing them to do things that we would consider evil?
Surely, very holy people have been possessed and have experienced exorcism, so it doesn't have anything to do with the moral quality of a person.
Well, you know, it's interesting you mentioned that, very holy people, because I was reading in some of my research, and I'm going to put this out right now, and I don't know if you knew this, but Mother Teresa allegedly underwent an exorcism later in her life, went under the direction of the Archbishop of Calcutta after he noticed that she seemed to be extremely agitated in her sleep and feared she might be under the attack of the evil one.
Yes, I am aware of that.
You are. So that's a true story. That's a true fact.
Yes, it is.
So obviously that speaks to the fact that someone very holy, can have this situation occur. So you told us what an exorcism is, then this is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show at 910 KINA Salina, bringing you innovative talk radio that surprises, entertains, and sometimes informs you. Today, I feel very privileged to have Father Randall Weber, Vicar General of the Catholic Diocese of Salina, here with us this morning. Father Weber is an exorcist, and he's here to talk to us about the very serious subject of the Catholic rite of exorcism. Welcome, Father Weber.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Well, and this is such an intriguing topic for so many people. Let me just first ask you a general question as what is the Catholic definition of exorcism?
Exorcism is the expelling of evil spirits, unclean spirits from persons who are possessed by them.
Now, is the person that is possessed by them generally thought themselves to be of a good spirit to begin with, but it's just this evil spirit or possession taking them over and causing them to do things that we would consider evil?
Surely, very holy people have been possessed and have experienced exorcism, so it doesn't have anything to do with the moral quality of a person.
Well, you know, it's interesting you mentioned that, very holy people, because I was reading in some of my research, and I'm going to put this out right now, and I don't know if you knew this, but Mother Teresa allegedly underwent an exorcism later in her life, went under the direction of the Archbishop of Calcutta after he noticed that she seemed to be extremely agitated in her sleep and feared she might be under the attack of the evil one.
Yes, I am aware of that.
You are. So that's a true story. That's a true fact.
Yes, it is.
So obviously that speaks to the fact that someone very holy, can have this situation occur. So you told us what an exorcism is, then you are an exorcist. Tell us what the definition of an exorcist is.
An exorcist is a priest appointed by the local ordinary, typically the diocesan bishop, or in our case, the diocesan administrator, to be the person who is contacted to examine potential cases of possession and to then actually perform them with his team.
Now, is there like a selection process? To be called this or be the one that they call, do you have to go through some sort of rigorous evaluation?
Yes,
in some
fact,
regard?
When Archbishop Coakley was here, he sent me to undergo a workshop in Tulsa, Oklahoma, precisely to train exorcists. And so when I came back, he asked me if I was ready to be appointed to the office, and I said I wasn't at that time. But because the opportunity arose to help participate in exorcisms, I asked our current administrator if he would appoint me to the office so that I could participate as an official exorcist.
So Coakley obviously felt that you were qualified enough to go, but it sounds like left some of this to your own personal determination whether you wanted to step into this role.
Yes, he did. It's not an easy thing to do.
I can't imagine. I just can't imagine the reading and research I've done. You know, it's quite noble and quite holy, Father, to be honest, is the way I feel for you to step into this role. So tell us a little bit about what you learned in Tulsa, in Oklahoma.
Well, in Oklahoma, we had the bishop come and lead us through the St. Michael prayer. We had official exorcists from the Diocese of Pittsburgh and several other dioceses there give us their accounts of their experiences, what to look for in cases of possession.
Had some of them actually done exorcisms? Because I know it's very rare and we don't hear too much about them. But these that talked at this did.
Yes, they did. They have.
They have. And go ahead. What else?
We prayed. We also had a religious demonologist from the Diocese of Pittsburgh who was a layperson whose expertise is in demonology, who speak to us about various matters.
Now, what does a demonologist tell you?
Well, he told us his own experiences. Not all of the exorcisms that were performed were official exorcisms in the ritual book. Some of them were what they call deliverance prayers, which is prior to an official exorcism where lay people can be involved. And so he talked about some of his experiences as a person participating on a deliverance team.
And I've heard that too. I'm glad you mentioned this deliverance because that was a question I had for you. And also the fact that I'd heard some lay people can get involved. So if a lay person is chosen, that would be called a deliverance, not actually an exorcism.
Right. A lay person or even a deacon may not actually do an official exorcism from the ritual book.
And that's within the Catholic Church.
Yes.
The rules of the Catholic Church.
Right.
Are you at all familiar with what some of the other religions do in regards to possession and exorcism?
Not very much. I did get a call from a Protestant exorcist in Minnesota who said he had met with a lady in our diocese who he felt may have been possessed. I contacted her parish priest to ask about her, and he said it wasn't a case of possession, and so I didn't pursue it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But that also brings up another question that non-Catholics can come to a Catholic exorcist if they feel that they might need that right?
Yes, the expelling of demons is for all who need it.
That's kind of reassuring, I think, for everyone to know, because this is so steeped in history and tradition within the Catholic faith, yet to reach out to anyone that feels they have that. In fact, at some point I might bring up some of the stories, the Exorcist film and where that all came from, because a lot of the stories I have heard weren't actually Catholics who were possessed, but were delivered by or given an exorcism by a Catholic exorcist. So when you had all of this happening, tell me a little bit about your personal journey toward deciding to do this.
Well, I've always been interested in the spirit world. As a priest, of course, you are, and the belief in angels and demons, and that from the New Testament, the cases of possession that Jesus performed and him passing this power on to his apostles. And so I've always had that interest in the back of my mind, but I never really thought that I would ever actually be an exorcist because it is so rare in the United States anyway. So I was kind of pleased that Archbishop Coakley saw something in me to lead me in this direction.
It's quite an honor for him to have recognized something in you, because all of my reading tells me that only a priest who is very secure in their faith and one word that kept coming out was very humble and not arrogant, and not doing this for any sort of glory or,
right.
to weave a fun story, at a party or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a very pious rite and very, very spiritual.
That's true. And in fact, there are qualifications noted in canon law for an exorcist, which includes piety, knowledge, prudence, and integrity of life.
Well, there you have it. And with that, you've just spelled out exactly what the criteria are. And so there was not a serious big process that you had to go through to do this. So does every diocese have their own exorcist, or do some dioceses just call on their neighbors, so to speak?
I think most dioceses don't have exorcists on a stable basis. Maybe 10 or 11 or 12 in the United States do. What other dioceses would do would either call a stable exorcist from another diocese or, in an individual case, appoint a priest for a particular matter. But I would say in the U.S., most dioceses do not have exorcists, even though I've heard that near the end of his life, Pope John Paul II called on all dioceses to have an exorcist, an official exorcist.
Well, now that's an interesting fact. Where do you think that came from? What was some resurgence of interest or some certain situation that brought the Pope to do that?
He himself participated in an exorcism in Vatican City, and I think that his understanding of world events and how there is an evil influence out there that is perhaps becoming more pronounced led him to call on the Church to be prepared to fight this evil.
He was such a pope of the world, and one of my greatest moments in life was seeing him before he died from the Vatican Square. And of course, you know, looking up at him when he gave his Sunday address, he was about the size of a postage stamp, but his voice carried, and honestly, it was just such an emotional time to see all the people from all the countries holding you know, the signs and the prayer and the tears and all of that. So for him to be the Pope of the world of his time, you know, and see this evil, you too obviously have to feel and believe that there is an evil among us that may at some point, you know, cause harm to us.
Yes, in fact, it's this evil presence has existed, of course, since creation. It was quite evident in the New Testament in Jesus' own ministry, very evident in the early centuries of the Church, all the way through the Council of Trent. I think perhaps the Enlightenment period lessened the demand for exorcisms, the scientific age, but the Church has realized that just because we've advanced in knowledge does not stop the fact that there is a spiritual reality that is hostile toward us.
And I think that's something that, you know, we do have to recognize, that the scientists, the psychiatrists sometimes, the mental health people will be looking at these cases as something in their realm, in the medical realm, instead of the spiritual realm. So was that something you learned in training to discern?
Yes, in fact, it's part of the ritual itself that some determination needs to be made that the person is not suffering from a mental illness. In the United States, typically, we send them to psychologists or psychiatrists. That's not the case in Italy or Africa or something like that, where the ritual itself is used as a diagnostic tool. But even then, the exorcist has to make a prudential judgment that it is not a case of mental illness.
So you're saying that before you would actually proceed with the rite itself, you would have this person, you would first see the person or have a report, like you had sort of a referral, you said, and then you called the parish priest who said, no, we don't think that's a possession. But after your initial determination, you would have them screened by a mental health psychiatrist or psychologist?
Typically, I would, although the exorcists in Tulsa said, don't make this the final determination, because you as the priest are the one to make the final determination.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, because, you know, we do believe in science, obviously, as well. And so what, did he expound on that a little bit?
No, but he just said that since so many psychiatrists don't really believe, none of them are going to come back with a determination that an evil spirit is possessing a person. So that's why the priest who does believe has to make the final determination.
You know, and I was visiting briefly with you. I saw you around town the other day, and we both were mentioning that the famous psychiatrist M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, he's certainly very renowned in his profession, believed in exorcism. And I read where he actually says that he himself was involved with 2 exorcisms, to the point that he was also so convinced of this concept and that this was a genuine phenomenon that he tried to get the psychiatric community to add the definition of evil to their diagnostic code book.
He's a wise man.
Well, how do you feel about diagnosing someone as evil?
Well, it's not that you're diagnosing the person.
Wonder if insurance will pay for that.
It's not that you're diagnosing the person as evil, but this entity that's inhabiting them is an evil presence within them. That's really what you have to determine.
But Father, that brings me to a question of, can we then say that every person who performs evil acts is possessed in some way?
Definitely not.
Okay.
Because all of us are tempted and all of us sin. In fact, that's usually seen as the prime tool of demons, is just to tempt people. The ritual says there are other things to look for. For example, does the person possess strength beyond their ability? I mean, the normal ability of a person of their age and physical stature. Extraordinary strength, speaking in languages that one has never studied, having knowledge of hidden events or even future events. We don't actually believe that demons can predict the future, but since they're far superior in intelligence to us, they can look at the signs of the times and make predictions that often come true. Typical thing that the exorcist told us to look for is a sudden hostility toward God and religion and holy things that did not exist before. This is a typical sign of possession in their minds.
So that's like the first and foremost, along with the extraordinary strength, the speaking languages they shouldn't know, and then of course the knowledge that they shouldn't have.
Right. In fact, I myself have been doing some interviews, and that's one of the things that I look for first. Is there a sudden, which did not exist before, hostility toward God and religion?
So you are getting some actual referrals of people that want to be evaluated, have come for evaluation to see if this might be happening to them.
Yes, I have.
And when you talk about them, this sudden hostility toward God or anything religious, how do they present to you? You're certainly the man of God, representing that and carry the aura of that.
Right. So far, I have not witnessed this to an extreme degree, either toward myself or toward the recitation of prayers or toward holy objects or holy water. So I haven't proceeded in the cases that I've.
So you already made that as kind of the determination that, of course, we must have something else, or we need to look a little deeper or in another direction.
I don't think the ritual itself says that must be present, because if some of these other extraordinary events are present, then that's not necessary. But I haven't seen these extraordinary phenomena either. So.
And honestly, when you talk about some of these other issues, to me, those aren't something you'd normally see in a mental health situation or a psychiatric patient, let's say. Have you talked to doctors per se, or did you in your training hear about, maybe that is such a difference from what you might see in a patient needing mental health care, that's such a barometer?
I did contact a Catholic psychiatrist, first of all, to see if he believed in the possibility of possession. He said, well, as a Catholic, of course, I must. And I asked him if he would help me make some determinations if I ever felt that it needed to go beyond the initial interviews. And he said that he would, but I should be aware that he would be looking for extraordinary phenomenon that would not be typical in mental illness.
Of course, which is also what you would want this psychiatrist to do.
Correct.
You'd want something that's outside of the realm of what that doctor might normally see and be able to put a diagnosis to.
That's true.
Since we don't have that diagnosis of evil for the psychiatrists to use.
Right.
Yeah. What other criteria, or is there anything else that tells us what can tell you they have a need for an exorcism? What about things moving? A lot of these things I saw were, they might get scratched or their bed might start to move.
Right. As far as possession goes, it would be something that with the demon possessing the body that would be affecting the body itself, such as scratches, or the person even doing self-mutilation in a strange kind of way.
Because what I read, a lot of these scratches would just, like during an exorcism, even just appear on the body, like a crucifix.
Yes, they can.
Almost from internal.
Yes, they can, from what I've heard from other exorcists. As far as the movement of objects within a room, if the person is not possessed, we normally call that infestation, that a place is inhabited by demons rather than a person.
If the possessed person, let's say, is not in the room,
right.
That's not the person being possessed. It's an
Right.
infestation of the
room,
room, the furniture, whatever.
the building, the house,
building, the
something like
house.
that.
Right. Which is something very different from what we're talking about, because you're talking about a person being possessed.
Right, and the exorcism is for the person who is possessed. These other things, such as infestation or obsession, really are more calls for house blessings or deliverance prayers.
But then the readings I did about exorcisms, those things were also occurring.
Well,
Is it frequently that both are happening at the same time?
yes, it is frequently happening.
And are these infestations also considered to be some sort of an evil demonic spirit?
Yes, especially if they're causing fear within the person. You know, the Holy Spirit does not cause that kind of fear.
Right, right. And well, we have so many interesting things to talk about. I want to just even visit some more about some of what you might actually see during an actual possession, the rite itself, a little bit more about that. But we're going to have to take a little bit of a break here. And this is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show. So stay tuned, because, again, we're going to have some more interesting information from our exorcist. Please go to joanyurkovich.com for the video outtakes, podcasting, and a link to iTunes. This is Joan Yurkovich Show on 910 KINA Salina.
Make the next one a little bit, well, closer to 10. I bumped out a little earlier, but that's no problem. Interesting stuff. Wow. So these guys down that you talked to actually did this.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Are you ready for your first?
I think I am. I have a team. I've asked another priest to assist,
Okay.
and another layperson or a deacon, actually, not a layperson, to help, and both of them have agreed. So I'll be doing the interviews, and if it's thought necessary, they'll be on the team helping me, doing the responses, etc.
And so it was your responsibility as the exorcist to go ahead and select your team.
Yes.
What criteria were you looking for? That's an important piece of this, because most of the exorcists do not go into this alone.
That's true. Actually, I look for the same criteria for the exorcist himself. You know, piety, integrity of life, prudence, good judgment, that sort of thing, and also a deep faith. People who are prepared to use the sacrament of penance on a regular basis, to receive Holy Communion regularly, that sort of thing.
So you are also taking a look at these people and how you know they've lived their Catholic life.
Right.
Their life as a Catholic, not just, you know, very, very pious, like you said, and very devoted and devout. So, well, let's just, let me get a drink of water here, and we'll go back then for just about 10 to 11, Ben, okay?
Okay.
I'm probably going to go ahead and let me look over my notes just a little bit, because we actually covered all this good stuff. Yeah. Go into the next segment. It's obvious I have a real belief in the strong spirit world too. And there's people that don't. They just can't wrap their heads around it, but it seems real to me.
I think that's part of the reason I agreed to do this, because I could sense that you weren't a scoffer.
No. I totally believe in it. And, you know, honestly, we're talking about a very serious subject here, but that's part of the beauty also, to feel that spirit connection. You know, the beauty of the faith is to feel all the goodness. You know, we don't necessarily like to go to the other side of it, but it's real and it's there. And unfortunately, like you said, I think it's unfortunately too much in our world. So.
Okay, Ben, my clock stopped, and we'll get going here.
Whenever you want.
All right. We're back, and this is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show here on 910 KINA Salina. We're back talking with our Catholic exorcist, Father Randall Weber. Good to have you back, Father. And I have to tell our listeners that they really need to go to the joanyurkovich.com and listen to some of the video outtakes. Although I'm going to bring you back, Father, to a little bit about what we talked about in these outtakes as to how you assemble your team. You do not go into this exorcism alone.
No, because the exorcism ritual calls for responses, you need at least somebody else there to do the responses.
Oh, I see. So you're reading over the rite, the actual rite, which is something you take in printed, or you can't have this memorized?
No, in fact, there's a ritual book I brought here in my briefcase. It's called a De Exorcismis et Supplicationibus Quibusdam, which means on exorcisms and certain other supplications.
Now, is that Latin?
That's Latin, yes.
Okay.
The official exorcism ritual is in Latin. So that's another thing that the knowledgeable part of an exorcist needs to be, is to have some knowledge of Latin to be able to recite the ritual.
So you're telling us that you recite all the prayers and all the ritual in Latin?
Currently, I know the Canon Law Society of America is translating the Latin into English, but it hasn't happened yet. So if you're going to use the new ritual of 1999, you have to do it in Latin.
Okay, so this was set up in 1999 that you do need to use Latin. So, like you said, you obviously must be fairly fluent in the language. Or...
Well, part of my canon law training was the increased study of Latin.
Of course,
because canon law itself is in Latin, and so a canonist has to have some knowledge of the language.
So your assistants that you choose have to have some knowledge of the language so they can do the proper responses. What other things do you look for?
Well, I look for what canon law calls for in an exorcist. That is, that they have piety, integrity of life, prudence, and knowledge, but mostly a deep faith.
And in the video outtakes you talked to, when you mentioned these things, you mentioned that you want someone who's practicing their faith, very devout and practicing their faith.
Yes. Most of the other exorcists on their team, they have also a lay woman, because when you're doing an exorcism on a woman, they said normally you should have another woman present, and lay men. I haven't yet put a lay person on my team, but I'm looking.
I was wondering about that, because what about if it's a child or a young adult and the family or parents want to come in? Is that at your discretion?
Typically, the parents should be a part of it in the case of a minor child, and they would be the ones to give consent for an exorcism to move forward. Mm-hmm. In other cases, for an adult, the adult himself needs to give consent for the exorcism.
Gives consent, but can they also ask for a certain family member to be available or be in the room?
Sure.
Or is that, again, the final word on that is the exorcist?
Well, the final word would be the exorcist, because he'd have to make a determination that the family member isn't going to cause more problems than help. You know.
And is there like you said you brought the rite, the man, what do you call that? I'm sorry.
It's the ritual book, yeah.
The ritual book. You bring the ritual book. What other things do you bring?
You would bring, of course, your vestments, which would be a cassock, a surplice, and a purple stole.
Now, why purple? Is that put in the edict that you're to wear purple?
Yeah, purple is the sign of penance and forgiveness of sin. Holy water you would bring, crucifixes, relics. All of these things can be used in the exorcism ritual.
Now, do you have in your little briefcase over here an actual Catholic relic? I'm kind of fascinated by those, which tell us what a relic is for anyone listening who might not know.
A relic is either a piece of the body of a deceased saint, or that would be a first-class relic, or a piece of clothing that they wore, which would be a second-class relic, or something touched to their body, which would be a third-class relic. But these are basically things attached to the lives or physical remains of saints that are used for devotional purposes, as well as can be used in exorcisms. And I think part of it comes from Old Testament stories about how Elisha's bones were able to revive dead people to life.
Oh, that's interesting. So would you be somewhat required to have a first-class relic for an exorcism? I would want one. I mean, if I was walking in there, I don't want a third class. Right.
I would probably use it. It's not actually required in a ritual, but
it's not.
But I would use it, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the other exorcists said they typically use the St. Benedict's crucifix, because it has an actual exorcism prayer engraved upon it. So they said that most of the other exorcists they know do use the St. Benedict crucifix.
Is that something that anyone in the public can get? Is
Yes.
a crucifix a St. Benedict's
Yes.
crucifix?
Yes.
And it has some engravings about the exorcism prayer or something?
Right. There is an exorcism prayer inscribed on the cross itself.
Is that inscribed in Latin?
Yes.
Do you know?
Yes.
Okay. I figured that might
I got
be.
one in Rome, so.
And so you talked about the things you take, the people who attend with you, and then you mentioned something too about, getting permission from a minor. And that really sort of brought me to the kind of back to the old medical school thing of, do you have to have people sign like a written release before you proceed with the rite?
Well, canon law doesn't require a written release, but certainly at least an oral agreement. Written release would be helpful, but not required.
See, now you come in here to do this, and I make you sign something, and you're going to
Yes.
go in for an exorcist. And one of the reasons that came to mind for me, too, in my reading is that I understand that sometimes the exorcist might have someone help to bind or tie down the possessed person.
That has happened, yes, because the demon can sometimes control the physical body itself. They can become violent, and so the assistants are sometimes called upon to restrain the violence of a person.
And with that, I would think, obviously the person we talked about how they can have visible scratching, but that in itself could even, this sort of violent attack could harm them.
Yes, yes.
Have you heard of situations that went completely awry during an exorcism?
They didn't talk about situations that had gone completely awry. They have talked about situations where it is difficult to expel the demon, and it takes months, sometimes even years. And in these cases, the biblical prescriptions of fasting and prayer are included. So it's not a one-time deal in many cases, a one-time evening exorcism.
Yeah, you don't just whip it out in a couple hours and we're
Right.
done. A
Right.
couple hours of devout prayer. And I read that in all of the excerpts I read. Some of these, you generally did not accomplish this in the course of one session. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about fasting and prayer, is that something that you're asking, you're expecting that of yourself and your assistants and
Yes.
anyone who's present?
Yes. But going back to your mentioning, have I heard of exorcisms going completely awry? There was a movie out recently called The Exorcism of Emily Rose, based on a true story of Anneliese Michel in Germany, where both a Catholic priest and a Protestant pastor were involved. And she did end up dying, and a jury found them guilty. The punishment wasn't that severe, but in that case, at least the civil society thought that it had gone awry.
Well, and I was going to mention that as well, because some of my research talked exactly about this. In fact, besides The Exorcism of Emily Rose, the film Requiem was kind of based as well on that story. And what they said was they were convicted, the two priests and her parents were convicted of negligent manslaughter for failing to call a medical doctor to address her eating disorder. I don't know if this was very protracted and took a long time, but she eventually died weighing only 68 pounds. Mm-hmm. So, I guess, let's just say there's got to be a little common sense in here somewhere.
Yes. In fact, some of the exorcists in Tulsa said they require as part of their exorcisms a doctor to be present.
Oh, that's an interesting topic, and we're going to have to take a quick break, but we might come back to some more information on that. So this is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show. Be sure and stay tuned in, 910 KINA Salina. More talk with our exorcist. That's actually, and you can't say that we don't live in a pretty litigious society. You know that.
Right. And in fact, I think oftentimes when I'm speaking of canon law versus civil law, what canon law requires and what civil law requires.
Right.
I think in the U.S., because we are so litigious,
Right.
normally it would be asked that we fulfill the requirements of civil law as well.
Was that addressed in some of your training?
No,
But
the prudential authorities in most dioceses would ask for that.
What are the prudential authorities?
The diocesan bishop who appoints the exorcist, for one.
Oh, okay. I thought that might be attorneys.
Well, most dioceses have...
have some attorneys on retainer. That
Right.
You'd have to. You're just too big of a
Right.
business organization and all that, too. So that was interesting. You came up with Annalise Michael, Catholic woman from Germany. She was said to be possessed by 6 or more demons and underwent a 10-month-long voluntary exorcism in 1975. Whoa. And that's not that long ago.
No, it isn't.
1975.
But it is 2 years after The Exorcist came out, and some people were saying that some of her symptoms were very much related to the movie. You know?
Well, in fact, some of my reading even talked about that. It talked about how, how some of the hysteria with the movie The Exorcism came in, and how there was actually even a new diagnosis that medical people and mental health people were calling was cinematic hysteria. So I might jump back into that. Let's talk a little bit about some of these in the news. And let me see if we've missed anything. Oh, yeah. I talked about the release. So, Ben, we have 2 more segments, right?
10 and 5, right?
Yes, you're right on top of it there.
Just whenever you're ready.
Get rid of the papers I don't need. That just helps me so I don't try to pull something wrong up.
One of the things I did want to tell you is a very common conception among seminarians and even priests that every diocese does have an exorcist, and it must be kept secret. Even in my early priesthood, this was the common thought, and people were saying, this priest is our exorcist or that priest is our exorcist. But, that wasn't the case, and nor is it the case that an exorcist has to be kept secret. I think that the reason that idea arose is because many don't advertise too much, lest they get sensationalists coming, or too many calls. So it isn't.
Which really isn't what you want.
Right.
But you're talking about your own priests and seminarians.
I know.
That's kind of surprising.
It is surprising. Well, demonology isn't taught for the most part in seminaries, nor exorcism, that sort of thing. I think it's coming back because of the influence of Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict, but typically it just wasn't a major subject. And even exorcism isn't a sacrament. It isn't one of the highest rituals of the church. It's considered a sacramental.
Right. This is so good. Please repeat it for the broadcast. I mean, some people watch the video, but of course the main thing is they go on radio. But I'd like to hear more about, what you just said. So we'll start with that, because otherwise we're doing good getting through some of this stuff here. You okay to go there?
Sure.
You're giving me a funny look. Oh, here, what am I doing? Let me get back. And Ben, what'd you say, 10? And you'll give me my cues. Okay, there, I got it. We're into segment 3, correct?
Yep.
A big thanks to my listeners for staying tuned in to the Joan Yurkovich Show here on 910 KINA. Again, we're here with our exorcist, Father Weber, and we were having a little talk during our break that you can see on the video outtakes at joanyurkovich.com. And I wanted to talk to you, Father, a little bit about what you were saying about how there was even a misconception among other priests and other seminarians, number one, that every diocese did have an exorcist, and you said earlier they do not, but also how maybe they were supposed to kind of be kept a little bit secret. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I remember from my early days in the seminary and even my early days in the priesthood, the talk among us that every diocese did have an exorcist and that it was top secret. And so we guessed among ourselves who our exorcist might be. When I asked the priest who we all thought, and he said, no. And after studying canon law and the ritual book of exorcism, I realized neither one of those things is true. Not every diocese does have an exorcist, and it's not required that they be kept secret if they do.
So I can see all these little seminarians running around, it must be them. So what were you all thinking it might be? What kind of voodoo, I'm just looking at you, you look like a really normal person. So what might they think might be the exorcist?
Well, we look for, in the old ritual of exorcism, which actually can still be used because of the Pope Benedict's Motu Proprio Summorum Pontificum in 2007, which allows the old rituals to be used. In addition to those 4 qualities that I mentioned, it was that the priest be advanced in age. which is not a requirement of the new ritual. So we were one thing looking for one of our pious elderly priests who had integrity of life and prudence.
Yes, and at your age, that's one of the things that people asked me when I said I was going to have this interview. They go, well, how old is he? You know, and I mean, I think they thought he was coming in on a walker or a stretcher or something else. You know, it's like, no, he's not. I wouldn't call you elderly, certainly. And
no, but I think I'm middle-aged at this point.
Well, you're
so.
middle-aged, you know, so am I. So, you know, but at that point I can't, you know, call either of us too old. So you talked about how, you know, how they, you know, wanted to kind of decide who it was. And you thought that this movement toward, you know, getting more exorcists visible, maybe even in the diocese, was by our last two popes here, our current seated pope and...
Yes, definitely our last two popes, Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI, want increased knowledge of this subject matter and increased use of it.
What has Pope Benedict said or put out regarding this? Have you heard or seen anything in the recent times?
No, apart from his Summorum Pontificum, which allowed the use of the old ritual books as well, because some exorcists in Rome, especially the official exorcist, Father Gabriel Amorth, had said that the new ritual was not as effective or as helpful, and so he wanted universal permission for the use of the old ritual. Mm-hmm. And most exorcists say they prefer the old ritual. Mm-hmm. And I am going to attend next February, again, an exorcism workshop in Tulsa where we will be focusing on the older ritual that came out of the Council of Trent.
And so when you have this ritual, you know, set the stage for me a little bit. You know, do these normally take place at night? And why do they have to take place at night? Where are they normally done? You know, kind of set the stage for that.
Normally, in the ritual book, it says it should take place not necessarily in a church, which is too public and people might be coming in, but in a sacred place like an oratory, which is a semi-public religious building. However, that's not absolutely required. They can take place in a person's home as well. But it should be a place where it's not public and cameras are not used. Oh,
they will not allow cameras for this?
No. Well, they say the media should not be present.
Understandably. I understand. Is there any form of documentation that would be held at the church or whatever?
Well, definitely the priest exorcist would submit a report to the diocesan bishop on the ritual and what happened during it and whether it was successfully completed or not.
Mm-hmm. So you have it at a holy place, not a hospital, though. There was some talk at one time in one of the case studies I was reading that they talked about going to a hospital.
Yes, they did. In fact, in the case that the Exorcist movie is based on, this boy Robbie in St. Louis, it was done in the Alexian Brothers Hospital.
Correct. And it was interesting because he was the one that had the exorcism performed in 1949, and that's where the actual movie and the book done by William Peter Blatty came out. Interestingly, though, of course, in the film was Linda Blair, so they changed, it to a girl. And I'm actually reading a book about supposedly the actual diary of the exorcist that was kept as documentation on this, kept secret and confidential, as the Archbishop was requiring of the priests who were involved. But this person was given this document, and certainly what I'm reading wasn't as, there wasn't any pea soup flying around, and
right, right.
It was very Hollywood, which is honestly reassuring to me in some sense, because that is still known to be one of the most frightening movies ever made.
Yes, I've heard some call it the scariest movie of all time.
And it is. It's actually been labeled that and put in certain lists of movies as one of the scariest movies. And I can tell you, certainly, I've never watched it, and I'm not sure I really want to watch it. But it was sort of reassuring to me, for all that I'd heard from people, that really didn't happen quite like that. Now, with this one I was reading about Robbie, the Robbie that was actually the true exorcism that was done on, he had a lot of disrupted dreams. Like we talked about, Mother Teresa was having these dreams, and they thought she might have something happening. A lot of disruptive dreams where he woke up and wouldn't remember. A lot of lashing out and spitting. And then tell me, how do you know when the exorcist, the spirit or demon has left the body?
It's very difficult to determine, And about the only way that you can is that a normalcy returns on a stable basis.
Mm-hmm. And how does that happen? What does that look like? I doubt you see a black cloud floating away, or maybe you do. What did these people down in Tulsa tell you?
Well, sometimes they ask the demon the time that it will depart, and so they look for normalcy after that time. You wouldn't normally see black clouds or extraordinary phenomenon. It would just be peace returning.
Did you hear, because I heard even with this little Robbie incident, that sometimes the demon will leave the body in urine or excrement? Have you heard that?
Yes. All of these things are looked for in addition to vomiting and
some expulsion from the body.
Some expulsion from the body. They told us to look for amulets or nails or something like that in the vomitus that came out.
Are you serious?
Because it was seen by these exorcists in Tulsa that it is possible that for people to be possessed by others casting evil spells or the invocation of others calling evil spirits upon you.
So sort of like the voodoo dolls, where I'm casting an evil spirit on you because I don't like you.
This would be seen more in African cultures and
yes,
societies.
I could see that in some different cultures. And so you might be looking for those very things that you said, but you're talking actual nails, like really nails?
Yes, I don't know if you saw the recent movie The Rite, but it was based on an actual priest being sent to Rome to undergo exorcism training at the Legionaries of Christ University. And it was based on his experiences. And he himself said, after seeing the movie, that it closely resembled his own experiences.
Oh, I'm going to have to watch that. I guess I will, but maybe I'll have to call you later or have some prayers and my crucifix and holy water handy. But we're going to have to take another little short break, but we have a final segment with Father Weber here. Stay tuned. This is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show. And again, be sure to catch those video outtakes, podcasts, and links to iTunes and my blogs on joanyurkovich.com. I'll be right back on 910 KINA Salina. You know, the thing that this reading, and I don't know if they mentioned this, but any of the excrement or whatever, they said what I read was just this ungodly, horrific smell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
different from normal vomitus, or obviously it doesn't smell good anyway. Did they mention that?
Yes, they did.
They did.
Well, not so much excrement, but the terrible smell. Horrible smells that
just in the room, whether that was happening or not.
Right. That almost was physically repugnant and prevented one from wanting to enter. Also,
so you don't have a gas mask in that briefcase?
No, typically not. But typically also
a couple mints to suck on.
Frigid temperatures would be seen as another thing. So terrible smells and frigid temperatures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I want to bring that up again too. And okay, Ben, are you ready for our final segment? And we have how long?
5 minutes.
And that'll go real fast. This is such a fascinating topic. Okay. Welcome back, listeners. This is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show on 910 KINA Salina. We're wrapping up our conversation here with Father Weber about exorcism. He is the exorcist for the Salina Diocese. Father, when we were on our little break, you talked about some other signs that you're in the presence of this demonic spirit that smells, other things going on. Tell us about that.
Yes, the exorcist down in Tulsa mentioned that oftentimes accompanying a possessed person is the terrible smell within the room, as well as frigid temperatures, both which are physically repugnant to people entering the room.
So he just said it. Did he give an analogy of what it might be? What sort of a horrific smell it might be, or
No, there was no
smells
comparative.
like?
No, it
you
was
know,
just
like rotten eggs, or
no. They didn't say that.
Sulfur.
They just said it was a physically repugnant smell.
So they mentioned that you're going to have this repugnant smell. You're going to have the frigid temperatures.
Well, it wouldn't be in all cases, but this
Okay.
would be something,
Oh.
an additional sign that one could look for.
So that's another piece of what we talked about. Even though you might interview the person before you actually begin to do the rite of exorcism, so it's also during the rite of exorcism that you acknowledge or know with certainty that there is an evil demonic spirit involved
Right.
because of some of these things we've been talking about.
And in fact, as I said, in Italy, typically the exorcism ritual itself is used as a diagnostic tool to determine the possession of a evil spirit.
Well, that's interesting. Now, when I was reading some of these case studies, a couple of things that got brought up is, how do these people get possessed in the first place? One thing that was mentioned was Ouija boards, and another thing was some sort of satanic ritual that they, obviously both of these, consciously get involved with. Have you heard of that?
Yes, typically violations of the first commandment, which would be attributing to creatures the power that belongs to God alone, would be opening up the door to evil spirits. We see this in the use of tarot cards, or consulting mediums or psychics, or attending seances, or satanic ceremonies, or things like this. Yes, we would see these as opening the door to
So opening the door, because honestly, I've talked to some psychics who feel they have sort of a goodness, a spiritual mission, and the Catholic Church does not buy that, does not believe that.
No. We would consider
If they're
that,
trying to contact a spiritual person in a good way,
No.
you think it still opens up some door to
yes,
other possibilities.
consulting the spirits of the dead has always been seen as a violation of the first commandment by the Catholic Church.
So as a priest, you can't even do that. So how do we, that kind of confuses me a little bit, because I feel like I'm sort of talking like to a deceased family member. That's not the same thing, though. Like if I'm praying to my grandmother to help me with something.
Yeah, that's very different than somebody summoning a spirit of the dead through a ritual or incantation or something like that. We ask for the prayers of the saints in heaven. We pray for the souls in purgatory, so we certainly believe there's a communion between
Right.
us. But when it involves psychics or witchcraft or mediums or seances, that's opposed to our faith.
And have you seen some people that have come to you for consideration of possession afflicted in that way?
Yes, and
You
in fact,
have.
I'm in a process of interviewing someone right now who, if they opened the door, it was through the consulting of psychics who fed them information that they followed, and it led to terrible consequences.
Wow, that's interesting. That could be another whole show in itself. But I have one final question, because we're going to need to close here, that I want to ask you. And what do you think, Father, this rite of exorcism brings to the faithful Catholics?
It brings to us an increase in our own faith that there is a God and there is a power opposing him, and we have to choose to be on his side.
That's just profound. I'm glad we can close on that, because, and that's the way I feel. If I ever feel that, even just in the presence of a negative vibe, someone who's angry or upset or something like that, I always believe in the better, the power of the good. And you, as an exorcist, have to walk in believing that with God on your side, you have the power to defeat those demons. Is that correct?
Exactly, that's our faith.
Absolutely. Father, this has just been one of the most fascinating interviews I've had. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good to be with you.
And this is Joan, closing now with the Joan Yurkovich Show. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today for innovative talk radio that surprises, entertains, and I hope today we've even given you some good information about the rite of the Catholic exorcism. This is the Joan Yurkovich Show, 9 a.m. Saturdays on 910 KINA.
A good thing to end on. There are even some people out there who, and this isn't my belief, but think, oh, all evil is just people making bad choices.
Yeah, but that's not the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
There are some people who do believe that, but that's not what we believe.
Right. I had a situation, and it was kind of bizarre, but I had a person that had a lot of things going on and had made a lot of bad choices. and just in talking privately with the person had said to me, I think I might be possessed. And, you know, I don't know. I kind of at that point was like, you know, is that one of those, well, the devil made me do it, so I'm not culpable. You know, I mean, you know, that it was an interesting conversation, though, you know, and I think there was some sincerity in that. But let's say someone, you know, watching the videos here that are still running, what should I have done with that? Should I have consulted my priest? Or I didn't personally believe it. I saw it was more of a scapegoating or whatever you'd call that.
It could be, but I was visiting with a woman the other day too who had undergone some terrible trauma in her youth, and she thought maybe she was possessed.
Yes.
But as I said, I would look for these signs and look for the complete picture, because.
And you would, but you know, but again, you know, it's kind of like, you know, and certainly if we see a child, you know, saying, I think I'm possessed, or I think I have devils, or you know, something like that. Now, this was an adult. I probably would have done something differently if it were a child. So if we had any other sense that this were something real, we would want to seek help and go and seek help. I do know at the time I made an extra point of praying, which I did today with you coming in. Not to say that because you're an exorcist you bring anything with you. If anything, I would think you'd bring protection. That's my feeling. Have you ever had anyone look at you askew when you tell them this is what you do, or
No, but I typically don't tell people that. You know, I'm not hiding it, and in fact, it's listed on our diocesan website that I am a diocesan exorcist. But you kind of have to search hard to find that. So I don't typically tell people that, because unless you're in need of my services, why would I?
Exactly, right. How many people, can I just ask, that you have already kind of reviewed their cases?
I'm on my third interview right now.
Wow.
Sadly, the second one committed suicide.
Oh,
and
so it was truly a mental health issue, I'm sure.
Right, but even demonic possession can lead to thoughts of suicide.
Oh, I would think.
And that's really...
If you have a good spirit battling that evil,
right.
And even with someone who's possessed, don't they have moments of recognizing their goodness?
Certainly, because...
And recognizing the battle?
Yes, because the demon cannot completely subjugate their will. Otherwise, they can never agree to the exorcism, for one thing. So, yes, there's their own will and the demonic will working in them. So.
And that brings up another interesting point that someone had read, or there was some belief that the possessed person has to in some way have allowed or agreed to allow this demon to possess them. Is that believed in the...
It maybe implicitly, but as these exorcists were talking about witchcraft, spells being cast on people in African societies leading to possession, I wondered when they said that, how did this person then freely invite this entity within themselves? That was my question at the time.
And how did they answer that?
Well, I didn't ask it out loud. It's the question in my mind.
That is a good question. That is a really good question. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you for having coming.
This is Joan with the Joan Yurkovich Show at 910 KINA Salina, bringing you innovative talk radio that surprises, entertains, and sometimes informs you. Today, I feel very privileged to have Father Randall Weber, Vicar General of the Catholic Diocese of Salina, here with us this morning. Father Weber is an exorcist, and he's here to talk to us about the very serious subject of the Catholic rite of exorcism. Welcome, Father Weber.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Well, and this is such an intriguing topic for so many people. Let me just first ask you a general question as what is the Catholic definition of exorcism?
Exorcism is the expelling of evil spirits, unclean spirits from persons who are possessed by them.
Now, is the person that is possessed by them generally thought themselves to be of a good spirit to begin with, but it's just this evil spirit or possession taking them over and causing them to do things that we would consider evil?
Surely, very holy people have been possessed and have experienced exorcism, so it doesn't have anything to do with the moral quality of a person.
Well, you know, it's interesting you mentioned that, very holy people, because I was reading in some of my research, and I'm going to put this out right now, and I don't know if you knew this, but Mother Teresa allegedly underwent an exorcism later in her life, went under the direction of the Archbishop of Calcutta after he noticed that she seemed to be extremely agitated in her sleep and feared she might be under the attack of the evil one.
Yes, I am aware of that.
You are. So that's a true story. That's a true fact.
Yes, it is.
So obviously that speaks to the fact that someone very holy, can have this situation occur. So you told us what an exorcism is. Then